Welcome to the 40-day challenge, and I have my friend Teja Vind with us.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her background, and there's a wealth more of information in this woman, but here's a little bit. So she's a 500-hour Hatha teacher and teacher trainer. She's also a level 1 and 2 Kundalini teacher, and her astrology training has been with Mitab Binton. So, Teja Vind, what led you on this path that you're on now?
Yes, that's a dynamic question, and there were really several different reasons why I got onto this path. One of the simplest ones was actually for yoga in particular. I was in college, and one of the prerequisites or one of the requirements for my degree program was to take like a physical education course or class. And so I chose yoga, which was really fun and amazing. And I was almost completed actually with my degree. And then when I took yoga, I all of a sudden started to realize the power of connection to your body, your mind, and your breath. You know, it's like with this element or this world of yoga and the occult world of astrology, meaning like the stuff that's hidden under the surface, what I really found was that I was kind of living life in almost like a haze, if you will, meaning I was just going through life in the way that I thought, you were supposed to, the way that my family lived it, the way that society told me, teachers, things like this. And then the more I became attuned to my mind, my breath, and that voice within, the more I realized, I think I have a different path in life than what I had thought for so long. And so then it just kept unfolding.
We would just have like these deep conversations about life and the planets. And so what led you to the using this tool?
Yes, and that's actually, it all came through that same way, and it was on that same front desk. As I was sitting there, this was like a studio, the least busy studio that we had at the time, and so I had a lot of time during the day, and so I would pick books off of the shelf. And one of the books was written by Mitab Binton, who was my main teacher, and he was actually the founder, he and his wife, of Yoga. And so I had kind of an affinity towards him anyways, because I knew who he was, and he was always just so inspiring to me that I picked the book up off of the shelf and started reading it. And it was really interesting for me because it was like, growing up, this astrology and the occult world was really pushed away. It wasn't seen as something positive. It was actually kind of negative. So I felt a little like, ooh, I'm going to read this book, like in a secretive way.
Yeah.
And as I'm like reading, I'm realizing like, oh God, this information is really familiar to me. And that's how it felt with astrology. It was such a powerful way for me to understand myself and things that it was almost like uncovering information that I had known from a past life, or it was just like deeply within me. And so when I started reading his book, it sparked this interest in astrology, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to check this out. I ended up getting a reading with Mitab, and then things started to unfold from there. He would offer trainings, and it was just so empowering to me. And the passion that I felt getting into it was just like, it was overwhelming. There was no question that was where I was going to head.
I was always into, what do you call the American way of looking at astrology? So like, I knew that I was a Leo, and I was really into that, and I never knew that there was this whole other way to look at all of the system that's around us. And that was just mind-blowing and fascinating. And I also got my first reading with Mitab also, and I was just like, what do you think getting a reading, first let's talk about what a reading is, and then how is it a useful tool?
Yes. Okay. So these are great questions. And I also love that you mentioned that like difference between the American version of astrology, if you will, which is like Western astrology. And that's what most of us are engaged with. And for me, I did that a little bit, but like you, I didn't grow up Catholic. I did grow up in like a Protestant Christianity. And that was part of the reason it was kind of pushed away, but it was mostly just seen as like, you know, woo-woo. Those are people who aren't really in touch with reality. Not like, oh. So yeah, Vedic astrology or Jyotish, it does use a different version of the zodiac that it felt more true to me. And so then I kept going down that path as well. And so for a reading, what is it? Well, readings, especially like your first one, is an opportunity for you to have an astrologer look at your birth chart, where things were placed at the time of your birth. And what this does is it's the best way to describe it, I think, is a way to validate who you are. Because I think in the first reading, what happens is, you know, I'll sit down with somebody or get on Zoom or on the phone. I'll look at their chart and I start to kind of describe the qualities that are showing up in the birth chart. And people, it's rare when someone's like, oh, this is like really brand new information. It's mostly like that thing I was mentioning earlier, where it was like an awakening within you or within myself, where it's like, oh, it's okay that I'm like this. And that's what readings tend to do. And so you can talk about several aspects of a chart or of your life, you know, career, relationships, money. Those are always the three big ones.
What are some questions that they could expect from the first readings?
And you're saying like questions they could ask, or
yes,
things that they could receive. So, you know, something that, and this is actually unique to whoever's getting the reading too, because then you get to decide, you know, what do you want to talk about. The things that you'll learn about especially are the way that your mind works and the way that your emotions tend to present themselves. And this is represented by your moon sign. And so this is unique to Vedic astrology, Jyotish, in the sense that we have a lot of focus, a lot of emphasis on where your moon was placed when you were born. And, you know, you can talk about the sun sign, which is important. Yeah, it is, it's a little less specific. And so if you go into a reading and you start to learn like, oh, you're right, I do have a Scorpio moon, which is really impassioned and gets really deeply and intensely into things. Or maybe I have a Gemini moon, which is a little bit lighthearted, and they like to tell jokes and they like to do a little bit of everything. And the way that they process their emotions is either through humor or through communication. Or, you know, there's all sorts of different ways that people tend to interpret themselves. And once you hear this from someone who probably doesn't know who you are, all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay. Again, validation as to who you are.
And so what I really like about it is that it like also can lay a map for you. Like, not only do you get a greater understanding, but like you said, the traversing of the paths, like for instance, you know, how you moved from far away to Texas, and your chart will identify those things, right?
Exactly. Yes. And it really does, you know, because you can see, oh, okay, you'll have more success or more happiness or more money if you were to move somewhere else that's farther away from your homeland. And some of this, you know, is also seen in your relationships and familial relationships, which can be so, I think, self-regulating when you realize for some people, it's very natural and okay for you to be separated from your parents, or have a good relationship with your sister and not with your brother, and the chart does show you this. And that's what can be so amazing. But one of the biggest things, and I like that you use the word map, because with Vedic astrology, we look at, in particular, we look at the timing of when things will unfold. And this can be frustrating, and it could also be hopeful, you know, like cultivating a sense of hope. And you know, I think one of the common ways is through relationships. And there's many of us that are like, okay, well, when am I going to find the person or whatever, right? And this is what Vedic astrology can teach you. I mean, there was a time in my life where it was very clear it was not the time to have a relationship, but I wanted to push against that so hard, you know? And so what astrology helped me realize was, yeah, of course, you're going to want a relationship and it's going to show up for you. However, you have this period of time where it's much better for you to dive into your meditation practice and your career. And then once those things get established, guess what shows up? The relationship. And so the map, what a great and frustrating thing that from my perspective and the way that I offer readings is that that's not extremely useful. It's actually better to see the gift within the challenge. Something that I learned and have really taken to heart, it's been so useful, and it especially came from Matab, was around the power of your intuition. Because I have this nature of my mind that kind of like in past lives, I've spent a lot of time hyper focusing on details, and you can learn and learn and learn. But the truth is, you know, wisdom is more powerful than knowledge. So maybe I have a lot of knowledge of all the nuances and all the aspects and all the little, you know, measurements in Vedic astrology, yet that could be seen as knowledge. Yet if you pull your intuition into it, you look at a birth chart, you see some patterns, and then the intuition kicks in, well, that's where wisdom starts to overpower your knowledge. And it opens up an opportunity to go with the flow of the reading, of the moment. And then you don't have to learn and go kind of crazy with all of those details and try to remember everything. Because, you know, if you are really looking into Jyotish, into Vedic astrology, it is inherently, it's from the Vedas, which is where yoga and Ayurveda come from. So it's like those three sciences work together: yoga, Ayurveda, and Vedic astrology. So you're going to be inherently utilizing intuition and meditation through the process of astrology.
Depending on the astrologer, they'll incorporate that yoga aspect. So using like chanting and meditation and mantra and even an actual practice is also really nice to incorporate into where this map could lead you and open up for you.
Yes. Yeah, and these are really good points, because I like how you were talking about, well, I use, you know, it's depending on the time of life or maybe even the question that I have, that's who I'm going to go to. And this is really important because I'm kind of that same way. I'm like, well, if I have money issues or questions around career, I'll probably go to Matab. But if I want to do something a little different or creative or artistic or relationship oriented, maybe I'll look into someone else. You know, it's like this, and it's not to say that, you know, for example, Matab couldn't do all of that.
No.
Yet, of course he could, but it's like there is a nature to what brings you inspiration and how to dive in and to navigate yourself and what is really resonating for you.
Okay, so if you had to give any other information about astrology, and I don't know, maybe you want to talk about the retrograde that's happening at the moment that I didn't know until a few minutes ago. So, what are you feeling intuitively right now before we finish out? We've got about another 6 or 7 minutes.
Perfect. You know, I think with astrology, because one way that I'll do astrology, or the ways that I incorporate it is offering readings. I also plan my yoga classes and events around astrology. And I also teach in teacher trainings for people to understand a little more about how to incorporate yoga into your own life, or astrology into your own life. And I think the most powerful way for people to incorporate this a little more is not only to get a reading so you can understand who you are. The best way to start learning is by learning about yourself, because you're probably the most interesting person out there. And then second is to follow the moon and the phases of the moon. I was blown away as to my ability to produce and to get things done once I started following the phases of the moon. So when you realize that it's full moon time and the energy is higher, we're meant to actually do a little more during the full moon, then you can start to understand how to plan your time and how to plan your life, if you will, and if you can. On the contrast to that, or contrary to that, would be the new moon. This is a dark time, meaning there's not as much light outside. Nature tends to soften. The plants soften. They deepen their roots rather than grow high. Animals do the same thing. We do the same thing. It's much better to be introspective rather than in the outer world. You know, honestly, if that's the only thing you do, you will find such a power within yourself. And then also compassion too, because it's like, you know how, especially if you grew up here in the Western culture, the more you do, that's how good you are, quote unquote good you are. But when it's a new moon, or the week up until a new moon, and you're feeling tired and you're really not all that productive, but you use your energy towards meditation or towards inquiry, self-inquiry, wow, now you actually become more productive in the long run, and then you're not beating yourself up anymore. So if there's only one thing you do, I would say follow the moon phases, because it really will change your perspective on things.
Because I've started doing like a new moon gong bath, and when I provide that, I do slips of paper, and it's about, because I'm a goal setter, I'm all about like goals. And so it's like, I have them write down a goal that they're wanting to complete in the next cycle, moon cycle. And then I have a full moon. It's a wine and yoga thing, but I know it's different than Kundalini should be, but anyways, we have that time, and I say, okay, and now that we're in the full moon, if whatever you were working towards isn't working, learning to like let it go, or creating a smaller step towards that goal is going to help you. Because I feel like you're right, that idea of perfectionism and workaholicism and you know, that drive to like produce and do is really, really difficult. And I feel like writing it down and setting your intention and being that introspective during the new moon that you were saying. And this is a great time that I find for planning, because I tend to obsess about the planning part too of my goals. Like if I plan and I plan, like I used one whole moon cycle of planning before I actually started doing the 40-day challenge, right? And it was like, okay, Leslie, so you can't, like, either you're gonna do it or you're not. And so
right.
It's like making choices and learning to let go when it's not working for you. And that moon cycle can really help in that process also, I think.
Let it go, release, and embrace what feels good and what inspires you. And you can utilize the timing and the map of astrology of the moon phases to guide you, yet realize it comes back to your inner wisdom and your intuition. That's what's true. That's what's correct. So I love that you're offering this for people.
Thank you. And I'm just so grateful that you came and did this for us and for me. And so if they wanted to get a reading with you or communicate and ask questions, where can they do that?
Yes. So you can find me several places. So social media. So Facebook, it's Yoga with Tej, Tej. I have my website, which is Yoga Bohem, yogaboheme.com. And then you could also find me on Instagram too, so it's at Tej Jarvens. Email, any of that. If you want to find me, that would be the way to do it.
So that way you can, and I'll put the links below also, so that way people can ask questions or get a reading, which I love.
Yeah, feel free. I'm always happy to answer questions for people too. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.
Uh-huh.